Today's connected world leaves no room for errors. Neustar reliably secures those connections. Neustar's cloud solutions, which include web application security, DDoS protection, DNS services, IP geolocation, and threat intelligence, ensure network availability across the globe. With over 20 years of award-winning security experience, Neustar proudly enables and protects digital assets of some of the world's largest enterprises. Find out how your company can benefit from the power of Neustar's trusted connection by visiting securityweekly.com/Neustar. Secure your world with Neustar. Always on, ultra secure. Do you worry about ransomware, data breaches, reputation damage, especially from phishing attacks, on employees working from home? The facts are, top cloud security tools have a 15% failure rate. 51% of phishing is social media based. Pixum knows because Pixum detects and stops breaches at point of click. Pixum's AI real-time solution detects actual fraud happening in a browser and stops it. Know your real security gaps. Get a phishing actualization test free at securityweekly.com/Pixum. That's PIXM. We all know that cybercriminals have the upper hand, and the most advanced ones have already made it past your defenses. When advanced threats like SolarWinds Sunburst compromise your business, you need a strategy. Tune into Extra Hop session Building a CISO Response Strategy to Advanced Threats at RSA Conference on May 19th to learn strategies to build resilience against advanced threats. Find session details and learn more about Extra Hop's presence at the 2021 RSA Conference at securityweekly.com/extrahop-RSAC. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. In our next technical training webcast happening tomorrow, May 13th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, how attackers gain access to endpoints and learn how to use defensive strategies to protect against those attacks. On May 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern, explore the latest attacks against DNS and the latest techniques to make it possible to discover and disrupt attacks. Then join our webcast on June 3rd to learn about pen testing tools and why every organization should be using them regularly. Visit securityweekly.com/webcasts to learn more and register. Of course, /on-demand gets you to the entire archive. We are excited to present the Enterprise Security News this week. As always, lots going on in the Enterprise Security News.
A lot going on with us too. Webcasts.
Lots of webcasts.
And RSA.
And RSA. We're very busy. Keeps us out of trouble sometimes. I'll just start at the top. XM Cyber has announced integration with Palo Alto Networks Cortex XSOAR. I thought this was an interesting kind of coming together of your SOAR platform, enriching that data with breach and attack simulation, which I think continues to be a hot space in enterprise security, and I'm glad.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. Yeah, I didn't have time to dig them up, but with XSOAR, it's always interesting to look at what the actual automations are, and a lot of that stuff is on GitHub, so you can actually go and look at the code for that. I didn't get the chance here, but if you do get the chance, it's super interesting, and I do believe they still have a community edition of Cortex XSOAR, that you can play with if you want to test out the product.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty, common sense strategy that if you see indicators of an incident at any stage, hopefully earlier in the stage of attack, that you can look towards the breach and attack simulation to go, yeah, there's actually an attack path to that critical asset, and here's what it looks like. And then if you see indicators that someone's starting down that path or looking at that path or maybe has started down that path, that should give it a higher priority in your incident response program, provided you have one, of course.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what, how they're actually using it. One of the things that we started to see the breach and attack simulation space do, I want to say it was Veridin or Safe Breach or Attack IQ, one of those, is they started integrating with your monitoring products, like your SIM or XDR product or something like that, to check and see whether or not their simulated attacks are getting caught, or at least even showing up in those products. And then they could tell you, hey, your SIM is blind to what I just did.
Yep.
Go fix it.
I think all that's awesome. But I do worry about coverage in all that. Like, how well are you positioned to see as many indicators as you can, and then how much coverage are you getting in all the attack paths, and then what's your capabilities to put all that together? Because that's a pretty heavy lift.
Honestly, I don't think you want to go for maximum coverage initially with one of these products. I remember early versions of some of these products, you'd log in and the dashboard would say, there's 1.2 million ways to hack you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like, what am I supposed to do with 7-digit numbers here? Like, you know, it's you got to make it actionable. And I think you got to prioritize what you go after first here. You know, I think that's some of what you're going to get out of the, you know, the integration, the combination of these two here is, you know, go after the key things that you actually see, you know, some of these attacks doing, and you know, the key places where you can stop them first.
That's what we're seeing, I think, in the bulk of the technologies that are coming out in security in general, is that the concept of an isolated technology that solves one problem is starting to be more and more difficult to get approval for or actually roll out in your environment. What really works now is adding context from other silos and other areas to your originally siloed tool to give it breadth and depth of analysis. And that context is what takes it to the next level. So, for example, I'm seeing a lot of companies add cloud security type technologies to what otherwise may not be cloud security. But if you take the context of what they're able to pick up by being integrated with your cloud security provider, all of a sudden your pen test tool or your your managed service, everything gets richer and smarter. And I think what we're seeing is just a breadth of context being added to tooling to give it a broader approach. So it's going to be neat to watch that as we move forward.
Yeah, especially in the asset and vulnerability space, that context is super important and necessary.
Yeah, because if you find a vulnerability, it's like, great, you found a vulnerability, but what does it lead to? How do you chain from one item to the next item? How do you handle true incident response, blast radius detection, forensics, et cetera, on a particular vulnerability? Well, that's all done with the context of the rest of your environment. And I don't think you need necessarily have to go to a huge context-style tool like Jupyter One has, but even just adding context to the individual tool is the way that those tools are going to grow over time.
It's interesting how there are so many ways to blend discovering what you have, and of what you have, what has vulnerabilities or misconfiguration, and then what are the actual attack paths that can be drawn from that, and bringing that all together, I believe is where the industry is trying to go. But there's just, Adrian and I were talking about it recently. There's so many different like Lego blocks you could use to build that. And like, what should you do? Like, I'm not even quite sure if I could give a blanket statement, right? It would depend on the individual enterprise and what segment of that enterprise. You may end up with a few different strategies and technologies to be able to build that. Like, your application development is going to be different from your Windows infrastructure. It's going to be different from your Linux infrastructure, which might be different from your desktops, and then your email phishing and your cloud services. So,
well, I think the good thing about that is that we don't, as individuals, we don't have to do that. We take the Legos, we dump the bucket out on the table, and we don't have to be the ones necessarily putting them together, because your vuln management vendor or your breach simulation vendor, they're looking at those Legos and extending their technology to include Legos that they didn't already have. Right. And so you don't actually have to do a lot of the building. You can, if you want to build a strong security program with great breadth, do something off of a true context management type solution. But I don't think we have to. In the near term, all the vendors are going to add that context themselves because they have to enrich what they have.
Right, and both these platforms are great examples of that. Both in XM Cyber and Cortex XSOAR, you have these huge libraries of attack simulations on one side and pre-built automations on the other side. And if those don't suit what you need, then as long as you got some Python developers, you can pretty much build whatever you want.
Yep.
Interesting how it ties into API security as well. There was an announcement, I think, from Sequence that got some funding. And also Peloton had a breach that was API related, which I wasn't aware of. But until this week. And I found it really, really interesting. When they analyzed the Peloton breach, it was very specific API insecurities and misconfigurations. And the thing I liked most about this article was to tackle these issues, they say the answer is to shift left while you shield right. I was like, if I had to sum it up in like one sentence, I'd go with that. I like that.
That's pretty much the secret to AppSec and has been for a while.
Yeah.
In general, AppSec has always preached, let's shift left, shift left, shift left. And that's great, but you can't ignore operational security that comes by shifting right. I used to call it shifting right, but I think the terminology they used is fine. Protect right or cover right or whatever you want to call it. You use kind of the build as the demarcation point, and everything left of that is AppSec. Everything right of that is runtime security of some sort. And I don't think that changes just because we're going from web servers or web-based applications to API-driven systems. It's still an application and it's still an interface. The interface isn't just graphical. It's a REST API or whatever. So you still have to do both code security, shift left security, as well as operational side for your APIs. Add to that the fact that applications have transitioned from written to assembled using libraries to, in the future, they'll all be those libraries. You won't download an open source library. You'll just make a call to somebody else's API that's maintained somewhere else. And if we truly believe that that's the future, then API security is going to be one of the biggest markets in the next 5 to 7 years that we can possibly get involved in, because everything will transfer over to APIs and API-driven assembly of applications.
Yeah. And you're right, Tyler. You may not own all those APIs, which is always my concern, because I think if you're left of the problem, you got a better chance of going like, look, when you create the API, make sure it gets created securely. I mean, ignoring the trillions of lines of legacy code. If you're going to do a new application, you're in good shape in terms of being able to apply good development practices and a really good process in DevOps or other strategies to go, when we build this app, it's going to have at least an 85% kind of secure API, right? Because inherently, you could probably do that pretty easily. My concern is when I go off and I've got API gateway and I've got other cloud native apps or other services I'm using, how are they protecting the API that's now incorporated in my application? And that's a two-way street, right? How much do I trust the data coming down from that API and processing it as well?
I think it's similar to the transition when we did architecture transitioning from in our data center to cloud service providers. You have to trust at some point there's a line that's drawn where security and trust of security that it's getting done transfers into your service provider. And if we continue to push into API usage for applications, that's the same exact transition. At some point, we have to say, okay, we don't own the APIs. We don't write the code for the APIs. We make the calls to Google Maps as a basic example, or Twilio. And we trust that Twilio or Google Maps is giving us a secure interface, a secure backend. It's very similar to the demarcation that happened in infrastructure transference. And I think that's going to be a really, really cool future trend to watch. So if anybody wants to build a company on API security, there's a lot of space there.
And we're starting to see people fill in that space, right?
Yep. Yeah, jumping back to the list, Cycode.
Cycode.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting how they say prevent code tampering. I mean, that's actually kind of what Tyler and I were just kind of hinting towards is, my calls back and forth between the API, the data flowing back and forth, if that's tampered in some way, that could be dangerous.
Yeah, and in the case of Peloton, everybody in the world knows that I worked out like twice since I bought my Peloton and never touched it again. So that's such a data leak.
Right. I think we could have theorized that people that bought Pelotons, that some of them were lazy.
I hope that somebody dumped all the data just to do that analysis.
Right? I mean, how lazy am I? I don't even own a Peloton, so I'm on a whole different laziness level.
No, you remember there are a bunch of...
You're the lazy that goes, that's what I am. I'm cool with it.
Yeah.
I'm the lazy that goes, no, I'm not lazy. I'm just going to spend $3,000 to prove I'm lazy.
Right. Well, I did buy an e-bike that you don't have to really pedal if you don't want to. So that's also a whole other class of laziness.
All right, Adrian.
That's the flip side of that. Yeah, I mean, the last big stories, before, Peloton's other issues have slightly overshadowed this. But wasn't it when Biden was first coming in that he wanted to bring his Peloton with him, and there were concerns about that?
There's so many concerns about Biden on a Peloton. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, yeah, no, they're going through a rough patch.
I mean, it's not a Stairmaster, but I just have to say the memes about that were absolutely hilarious. Something's happened in the world and it's just awful, but the memes are great.
We got to have something to laugh about.
That's true. On to more serious news, HelpSystems acquires Beyond Security, which is interesting. They just bought
acquiring a bunch of stuff.
But what's interesting now is they just bought Digital Defense. So like they're swallowing up now 2 vulnerability management providers. And I think in HelpSystems is a sponsor, just full disclosure, we did a sponsored interview with Bob Erdman last week on Palo Security Weekly. He was very tight-lipped about what was coming up because I kind of had some tips. I'm like, Bob, you guys are positioned to do some stuff. He's like, maybe. And so now this week, they picked up their second vulnerability management provider, couple that with Core Impact and Cobalt Strike. If they can put all these pieces together, take the best of all these products, they're poised to really be a player in the market. What I really would love to see is the incorporation of the vulnerability management platform, the kind of pen testing and exploit platform, and a breach and attack simulation style to that, whether they adopt what they have or they acquire breach and attack simulation. To put that all together, I think you can, I don't want to use the analogy, check a lot of boxes, right? But I think if that product works really well, you've got great coverage because you're picking up VM providers, you've got great validation of what is real, and then you've got a great attack path simulator that's going to tell you where your weakest paths are. I mean, if you can do that and stay enough ahead of the attackers to stay out of the headlines, that could be really cool.
I'm just going to clear up my own confusion out loud because I think it might help others. I was not familiar with Beyond Security, but apparently
they're not Beyond Trust and not
Beyond Trust.
And sometimes I got them confused with Digital Defense, and I'm like, did you buy the same company twice? I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah. But so Beyond Trust, the EI stuff is all end of life and I think shut down by now.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah. So if it's not shut down, I think it was December. They were shutting down the support for the last of it, or maybe they ended sales and support's still going on for another year or something like that. But it's dead. It's effectively dead, unless you still have some of it running somewhere. They won't sell it to you. But Beyond Security, it looks like is entirely. Are they entirely AppSec focused? It looks like SAST and DAST.
Oh, is it? I read it as more basic vulnerability management. They could be stronger on the AppSec side. I know that
the industry's only vulnerability management platform to combine XDR, SAST, DAST, and mobile security.
Interesting.
Is their tag? Is their the short version on their website?
Because Digital Defense, Bob was talking about, also had some web app scanning capabilities, some DAST as well.
They do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a traditional stack. Veracode had that same stack for years. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, I definitely wouldn't say they're the only ones to combine those.
No, certainly not.
No, but that's rounding out HelpSystems stack there. All HelpSystems needs now is a attack surface management vendor, right?
Right. That'd be interesting if that was next. They're putting together an interesting portfolio, and also don't forget too, you combine all these research teams into one. Now you start to be able to compete at a much higher level in this space. I mean, because that's a lot of what separates the big three VM vendors is they're all public now, so they've all gone through funding rounds, and now they've got public money, and they can go out and hire huge research teams that they've been building for years and years and years. How do you compete with that? Well, you buy companies and combine the research teams is one way.
Yeah. And then there's CSPM, which you could kind of put in the space. And then there's, container security, and then there's, like the Synopsys Black Duck type of, looking at the library level of stuff. Like Paul said, there's a lot of sprawl in vulnerability management right now.
Yeah, you could really extend vulnerability management to all those areas. Not in our next group test, as we agreed upon.
Not all at once, at least.
Not all at once. Got to break it down. Accurics, I should say. I always say that wrong. Accurics has an open source project called Terrascan. It's kind of I think is their open source like infrastructure as code project is now integrating with the Argo project. So Argo is an open source GitOps engine for Kubernetes. And so they're combining those together to support each other, which is interesting.
And we're seeing so much infrastructure as code scanning stuff now. Like I feel like every week there's been at least one story in here talking about scanning your cloud formation stuff, or your I'm assuming Terrascan scans Terraform stuff.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Sequence Security API was not a funding announcement. It was actually a Sentinel 2.0 is their product, which they came out with, which is going back to our previous discussion. They call it 360-degree visibility because someone in marketing wrote it, which is fine. I understand. You got to, marketing people got to do the marketing. But helping eliminate surprise discoveries of APIs deployed outside of a defined process. I think most organizations today need that. If they don't need it today, they will need it in the future. And as Tyler said, it's a hot space to be in.
The marketing, I'm just in my mind's eye, Tyler, how often do you put on like an Oculus Rift headset or something like that to come up with your marketing messaging?
You don't see my normal office. It's just full of headsets and crazy gear that puts me in the mood of looking 360. Just saying.
Yeah.
I'm having visions of the Plague in the movie Hackers when he puts on the VR headset. He's swinging his arms furiously.
I just scour the world for the web for buzzwords that I can add that don't sound too far off, and then I put in like 40 of them, and then it just works out.
Yeah. Pivoting to email security, protecting sensitive emails and attachments, Seclore Security24 is a product in that space. And as I believe this is like a kind of a product update announcement, I think very similar to Material Security. Interested, to see the differences. Of course, Material Security is a sponsor here on the show, so we were able to do a deep dive into how they do it, which I really like, and I think it is an integral part of your strategy to protect your sensitive data. As we've established, a lot of that lives in email. It needs to be protected above and beyond just phishing, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean it's interesting that this is still even a third-party product at this point, though. I feel like, with most people using Office 365 and G Suite and stuff like that, this should be more built into that. I'm shocked at the amount of bad stuff that makes it through Office 365.
Well, I think that Google and Microsoft are in the business of providing email. And providing security for your email, they've left to other people, right? I mean, their teams are poised to go, I want email to be available. I want to store a ton of it. I want to collaborate with it. And security doesn't fit into that mix if you're providing the infrastructure and the service to provide email, right?
I thought Office 365 had it, but remember back when, I think they shut it down or spun it out or something, but Google had purchased an email security company, started with a P. Anybody remember the name of it off the top of their head?
No, I didn't know there was going to be a test. I would have studied.
It's a memory test. I failed it. But yeah, they eventually shut it down, but I remember it doing a really good job back in the day. The times I'd used it.
Yeah, I think
it's interesting that they don't want to run that piece now.
Yeah.
That they're leaving this to third parties.
I think it is interesting that they're leaving it to third parties because they could certainly acquire. Is there any money in it?
Is there any money truly left in it? Because almost like it's a commoditized situation that they probably looked at and said there's really not, it's going to be a minimal add-on cost. If anything, maybe we just throw it in for free when you sign up. So the heck with it. We won't even do that. It just ends up being a cost center. Let third parties run it.
I mean, I honestly see it as one of the few places in security where you could claim some actual ROI because, messing up people's inbox, cleaning out people's inbox is probably like that's at the top of my list of things I want to happen to my inbox.
We're in cybersecurity. What is ROI? What is this ROI thing you speak of?
That's what I'm talking about. It's like there's not a whole lot of opportunities for it, but email is one.
I mean, put it in the context of I want to securely upload or send a message to my accountant, right? Most of those firms and small bit, I mean, they're using something like a Mimecast, right? It's an add-on.
Yeah.
They may have Google or Office 365, but they have this requirement. And why isn't that in the Microsoft platform? Maybe it is. You could probably build it today, with everything in the Office 365 suite, right? Or maybe it's in beta, or maybe they just don't have it. And as Tyler said, there's no money in it. So we're going to leave it to Mimecast. Like, why go into this market and disrupt it if they don't have to?
Well, and look at our own needs at Security Weekly. Like, trying to find a Microsoft product where we can enable people to send us attachments,
right?
It is pretty damn tough, right?
So you end up in a third party.
Yeah, hard problem, high cost, low revenue, low margin. Forget it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Tyler, in that analysis. I think that there's lots of other ways Microsoft and Google can make money than trying to play in this space, right? Let's see. We talked about the pipeline attack pretty much at length. Related to that, I did see it was interesting. So the folks at Synack, right, kind of the crowdsourced pen testing kind of thing, are working with DoD and DOE in offering the value of a crowdsourced pen test into those sectors. And there's some incentives there in that program. It sounded like the government is incentivizing this activity to happen in order to improve critical infrastructure security. And this is just one way, is to get these highly focused crowdsourced pen tests in there, testing and helping secure the power grid. As the founder of Synack, what's his name? Now I can't.
I'm hoping that.
I did. Jay Kaplan, right?
Yeah. I'm hoping that's a closed crowdsource, a closed crowd, not an open crowd, right? Because that would scare.
Synack is more of a closed crowdsource kind of model. Yeah.
And they've always been, so he comes out of government, so he started Synack with a lot of government contacts. I think he's ex-NSA. So that's always been their kind of one of their niches is you can trust our crowd.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, sure, that makes sense if it's a closed crowd, a hand-selected crowd, certain people, that's no different than a pen test with, 1,000 approved people that you vetted, right? It's a similar thing. And then I think it makes a whole lot of sense. You're just extending your penetration testing, really.
Yeah, and so when I was talking about positive versus negative reinforcement, right? Under the NERC SIP incentives approach, utilities would receive incentives for voluntarily applying SIP requirements to safeguard all external routable connectivity to and from low impact to high or medium impact systems. So this would fall under positive reinforcement. If you implement these guidelines, then you get some incentive, right? Grant incentives to utilities that implement automated and continuous monitoring. It's also in there.
I can't wait to see the ROI or efficacy of that plan. I'll be to bet it's a very, very low.
Yeah, they do link to the details. I did not read all of the details. The only thing this article says is that there are incentives, right? But what is the incentive? Is it money?
Is it incentive would have to be huge.
Yeah, or to make it worth it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think this is the same bucket of money that, in the first segment, I mentioned the, no interest loans and some of the other opportunities these same utilities have for replacing equipment and putting in cybersecurity controls and things like that.
Yeah, I think they need to be incentivized to take down some of their technical debt, because inherently there's huge technical debt and we're going to put this system in and it's going to live for 20 or 30 years. And it's hard to, back to ROI, it's hard to justify that ROI in an infrastructure business versus an enterprise business.
Yeah, I think this is the same one. Yeah, because they're talking about there's two types of incentives: rate of return adder of 200 basis points, which I assume has. Okay, I don't understand what that means. Oh, or deferred cost recovery for certain cybersecurity related expenses. Right. So, yeah, again, I think that's referring to some of these no interest loans.
Well, because you take an enterprise business that has competition. You reduce your technical debt, and that improves your customer experience. So you could argue to your board, hey, we're going to get more customers. By the way, we're also going to be more resilient to attacks. So it's a double win. You can't translate that to critical infrastructure. I don't have a choice who provides me power. And what I can't go, I'm going to go with that power company because they've got an app and a better user experience and they're more secure versus the other one where it's an antiquated system. Like, you don't have a choice. It's infrastructure.
It's like ISPs are often like that too. You don't really have a choice. But I'm going to read my favorite sentence here, which is the total cybersecurity incentives requested would be capped at the zone of reasonableness.
No, the zone of reasonableness. It sounds like someone has their wizard hat on. Their wizard hat on. You are now entering the zone of reasonableness. And you are alone because there are very few people. There's no one else in the zone of reasonableness.
I cast incentives.
Yeah, right.
That's right next to the swamp of no return from Princess Bride, right? Or whatever that swamp was.
The fire swamp.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess social media is the exact opposite of the zone of reasonableness.
Right. With the ROUTSs?
Yeah.
Rodents of unusual size?
Yes.
That's also what Twitter is. It's full of those as well.
Yes. ForcePoint has acquired Cyber Inc. Cyber Inc. delivers a remote browser isolation technology, which is kind of interesting.
Still a thing.
Still a thing. I think it's deployment that people get hung up on with remote browser isolation, deployment and maintenance, right? It's that whole, not ROI in the context of the business, but ROI in terms of how much security is it providing versus how much effort it is to implement and maintain. How much pain does it cause the users? I mean, security people, I think we like the browser isolation in terms of technology and thwarting attacks. But again, we can't just base our decisions based on, well, it's cool tech and it prevents attacks, but there's other criteria that you need to take
user experience. User experience, efficacy more often than not.
What's the most critical app on most people's systems that they use the most? It's the web browser. So you can't mess with, you can't break too much with the web browser. You got to be very careful there. And I actually covered this market when I was back at 451. And it's interesting how little has changed with it. I think most of them, like I haven't seen a whole lot of funding here, but it seems like they're most of them have been able to stay alive, and there've been a few acquisitions here, but yeah, I think ultimately it's something with a niche use case. ForcePoint, was partially born out of Raytheon, so I'm betting there are a lot of federal use cases here where within this certain environment, you're going to have to use a remote browser over a local one.
Yeah, I think for me, I like Pixum's solution. I like the browser plugin because I think from a user experience, it sits there in the background and it doesn't get in the user's way. I also like Vicarious and other similar technologies that are doing runtime protection, in-memory protection to protect against browser exploits. And those are two different attack paths. And right now, as far as I know, you need two different products to protect it, but that's the other route you could take.
Yeah, I think Pixum is, it's interesting. So the latter one that you mentioned, I think is interchangeable with a remote browser. The idea with a remote browser isn't necessarily that it stops the attack; it's that the attack happens somewhere where it can do less damage.
Like a Bromium.
Yeah, limiting blast radius. Now, Bromium, I think, would actually do some detection. Yeah. But because it was still on your machine, and the data you might want to protect might have been within that. Micro virtualization sandbox that Bromium creates. But Pixum, I think, is complementary with both. Because that's a phishing site is not exploitation.
Right.
That's at the human social engineering level, and you need a totally different kind of protection for that.
Mm-hmm. Sophos is claiming they're launching the industry's only XDR solution that synchronizes, bear with me now, endpoint, server, firewall.
We got some qualifiers.
And email security. And I think what they're saying is they're the only one that has XDR that goes across endpoint, server, firewall, and email security, which is a bold claim. Not sure how true that might be.
I don't think I've seen email security or firewall really in an XDR solution. Most of what I've seen is I haven't dived too deep into it, admittedly, but most of what I've seen is network and endpoint combined.
Right. Yeah, the email security one I think is the qualifier for me that would be interesting. I mean, Sophos has a huge email security product suite as well.
Our XDR adds email security, I think, is the more understandable.
Yeah, I agree.
Headline.
Agreed. Cool. Adrian,
but not too bad. We've seen worse announcements.
Yeah, for sure. Did you guys have anything you saw this week you wanted to add into the mix? Adrian's just been buried. I know Adrian's been buried this week because
I'm never not buried, so I don't have anything specific to add. I think we covered the bulk of the good ones that I saw.
Outstanding. Tyler, Adrian, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening and watching this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. See you next time.